Welcome. You're here on the How to Serve as a Project Team Member track, which is really about just getting you guys up to speed so that a project manager doesn't have to train you and get you all, started from square one. You're going to come in and prep to work in a project team. My name is Andrew Baldwin. I am, as of this year, a project manager. For the last 8 years before that, I was a tech analyst, mainly focused on audiovisual projects, live events, broadcast systems, and pretty much every special project that our team got assigned usually ended up with me in there somewhere. Prior to that, for about 10 years, I was mainly audiovisual and computer lab support. So I've kind of worked on the project teams in a lot of different capacities and a lot of other duties as assigned type projects. So I'm just here to share what that looks like for you guys as a project team member. I do want to say this is the first breakout session of the day. So if you remember Perry mentioning the map where you can list your takeaways and things like that, I'd like you to keep an eye out for things that you can actually apply. And instead of just keeping this all theoretical, find places where you can actually take it back to your organization and start improving your work and making your life easier. We also have the bulletin board that we posted, and I'll throw a link in the chat for you there. You can post your takeaways there. You can post questions and shout outs for anybody you've connected with. I don't know how much time we'll have for questions throughout our sessions, but we do want to answer your questions. So really, if you have a question, even if you don't think we're going to answer it right now, we're going to keep track of these and somehow address them, maybe through an email or a blast at the end of this. I'm not sure exactly what. But definitely we want to answer your questions somehow by the end of the week. Let's dive right in. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I think Perry mostly covered this in the opening session, but just want to give you a really quick glance of what our project management journey was at SDCOE. On the left, that's kind of where we were a few years ago. This big swirl with lots of little bits of chaos, confusion, lack of structure, that kind of thing. And the reality was that projects would start and stop. They'd die on the vine, or they'd never end. I'm sure some of you guys have those never-ending projects that were only supposed to go for a few months, and here it is 5 years later, you're still supporting it. Part of project management is to not have that happen. So we've been through that. We had various approaches to project management throughout our division, and we had different approaches on how we engage customers. We were all doing very good work, but it was really clear that we could do better. We can always do better. So what we did is, I forgot to put in the bullets for it, but there's the bullets of all the things I just said. So what we did is we created a framework for high quality and repeatable process so that you can focus on the work in an organized and predictable manner. And the point is to kind of spend less time and energy on the overhead wrapped around the work. I'm a very action-oriented guy. I want to focus on the tasks and the purpose we're here for, and not all this junk that makes our jobs harder. So the point of project management is to make it easier, not harder. And once you kind of have this soaked into the way you work, it's going to come really naturally, and you're going to be better at your job, and you're going to be faster at your job. And you're going to be less stressed out. For those of you that have worked in a support capacity through the pandemic, I think is probably the most stressed I've been in my life, and project management processes will help you bring that down. So anyways, we put together a framework. We put together a toolkit, which we'll share with you guys to help provide tools that you can use to make the work easier. We ran it through about 22 projects, and we also developed a curriculum in which we trained a little over 100 ITS managers and staff in our division on the methodology. So our entire division got this all at once. And the end result of that is that as you mix teams together, you're working with your dev team, you're working with your infrastructure team, they're all on the same page, and it becomes very easy to mix teams together on different projects because they don't have to learn how to work together. They already know it. So that was the approach we had, and it took some investment at the beginning, and now as we're a few years into that, it really is paying off. Like, as we're just assigning different teams, and there's no, how do we work together? How do we, they do this practice and we do this practice. We don't have that anymore. We all just are on the same page. Standardization. So we've worked through that. And the point is that we can just dive in and get started on the work instead of spending effort on how to work together. And the end result of that is that we're finding our projects are have improved quality, which means, if you remember the triple constraints that Perry just went over. That means they're on time, they're on budget, they're within scope, and the quality is good. We have a consistent approach, and we actually have more involvement from our customers, which is a good thing usually. So that's kind of our journey in a nutshell. Today's goal, well, first off, I'll ask you guys in the chat to just throw in a name of the project you've been on and whether or not you use project management methods. And if you did, as a bonus, what sort of approach did you use in those between the three of predictive / waterfall, where you have a full plan of everything right off the bat, or if you did agile, which is pretty popular in dev work, where you're kind of doing iterations and sprints, or if you did a hybrid approach, and if you could tell us about that. I'd love to see kind of just where everybody's at in this session. For the most part today, you're going to hear about predictive waterfall, because that is probably the easiest to adopt, and it's the easiest to bring back to your organizations and soak into the work. Robert, I see you're doing agile. That's awesome. Agile is fantastic, but it does take a complete shift in mindset. So we don't dive into that too much, because it tends to mean that you need to get your entire department to start doing it. That could be a whole another thing. Installation of firewall, HA pair, mostly waterfall. Yep. Installation project. Oh, Gabe. Yeah, sorry. Hey, Gabe. Installation is typically a predictive thing, because you have a plan, you know your goal. It's real clear cut. Perry's here. ServiceNow implementation. Use the waterfall method. Had no software and managed it in Excel. That can't be fun. It can be done, but it can't be fun. I see Patty selecting a new vendor for a new district website. No project management formally used. Gotcha. Terry doing MFA. We're going to use MFA as an example later on. And that one is such a great way to show. I almost wish we had a case study of before, if you did this without project management, and if you did it with, because it would be night and day. Alexandra, no formal method, but we could call it a hybrid. Try to predict what you can, but things change on a dime frequently. That's probably the life I live in the most, where you have, especially in AV, where it's somewhat developmental and somewhat hardware-based. Hybrid really works there. Plan what you can, but still build in that agile mindset to go with it and do iterations at the same time. It's tricky to do well, but it really is probably the best thing that you can do. A lot of our work. Lots of good stuff. Was on the firewall project with Gabe. Awesome. Oh God, I gotta shut my mouth. We're done. We're closing the session before Terry signs me up for more work. Reich and a few others tried. Awesome. We're using Monday here, as Perry said, but really it's about what software tool works for you and your team. And I'll get into that more, so I don't want to get derailed too much. As you're going through these sessions, what I'd like you to do, you know, assuming that you're in all three of the project team member sessions, I'd really like you to think about areas of your projects that were difficult, that were confusing, that were frustrating, or they weren't perfect. And I promise you, I'm not starting to start this off as a total bummer, but the point is really being solutions oriented. So I want you to look for your pain points, because those are the easiest things to fix. You get real specific of, we had terrible communication, or we had false starts, or we had projects that didn't end, or people didn't know what they were supposed to do, or nobody got anything done because they weren't accountable, that kind of thing. Look for those things and think about the projects you've been on, and look for the ways you can solve that as we provide you with the tools we have today. And our last team member session, we'll go into a breakout actually, and have you guys discuss that and talk about ways you can solve this and actually bring back actionable items to your organizations. All right, so we're looking back at the string where it's all messy and cloudy. Today, our goal is to get you into this middle area where the string starts to unravel, and then as you go back to your organizations, the goal is to get to the right where everything's just kind of flowing as smooth as it can. Projects are still crazy. They're still rife with changes and all of that. And the point is to plan for what you know so that you're more able to deal with what you don't know, or what you don't expect, rather. Other 2 points today are today's goal is so that you can say, number one, I know what's expected of me as I serve as a project team member. And number two, that you understand the methodology everyone's following for your team's projects, instead of just a PM sitting at the top shouting all these things about project management. The point is really so that you understand exactly the parts that apply to you, and that you can kind of see the big picture. Like I said, if you guys have questions, I'll do my best to get to them depending on how time is. Bottom of most of my slides will have this Padlet link, so you can throw them in there if you don't have the link from the chat. All right, guys, welcome back. I know it was a very quick breakout, just a little interaction to get your blood pumping for a conference. Honestly, does anybody want to just share out live instead of hitting the chat, or would you guys prefer to throw it in the chat with your discussion high points?
Andrew, this is Tom with Riverside County Office of Ed. I'll go ahead and share. But I think the common theme for all of us was that any of the projects that did have project management involved went a lot smoother. Communication was there. There was either no scope creep or very minimal. And those projects that didn't have project management were usually a mess. You were pulled into meetings that maybe you didn't need to be part of, or the alternative, or you weren't included in a meeting that you should have been part of, and it's a lot more stressful on the department.
That's a great point, and I like your point about meetings. Is we're going to talk about meetings, which everybody loves to talk about here, and it's kind of funny. The point of project management is to have less meetings, not more, and that's the end goal, or not the end goal, but that's definitely a nice byproduct, rather. So great points, Tom. Does anybody else want to add on to what Tom said? I think he covered quite a bit.
Andrew, this is Kathy from Del Mar.
Yeah, Kathy.
Just being part of the team. I think when we just started doing the project charter in our district in Del Mar, but not having that before caused a lot of friction sometimes with our team members of not knowing who's doing what and them asking certain questions that maybe someone has in their head that wasn't asked. So I find that using the project management, the tools that we were taught in there and having some kind of format with it is having all those players in the beginning and getting those questions out in the front and getting that accountability and everyone knows what they're doing, so we're not bumping heads through the process.
Very well said. I can't agree more. It's very frustrating working on a team where nobody really knows what they're doing, or you feel like nobody's accountable, nobody's in charge. Things don't really get done until the fire is there, you know. So it's nice to avoid that. It's much easier, more predictable way to work. So thank you for saying that, Kathy. Let's jump right in to the content finally. I'm gonna give you a quick overview of the project management phases. Now, those of you that might have PMPs might irk a little bit at the approach here because it's not what the PMBOK guide says. But our point, the way we approach this is really to make it easy to digest and easy to apply so that you don't need doctorates or a PMP to actually start doing these project management practices. So that's our pared down approach. Project management is looking at 4 phases basically, where initiation, where the project kind of gets thought up and dreamt up and starts to get some buy-in. Then we go into planning, where we lay the groundwork to begin the project. Then we go into execution, which is where the majority of the project work is actually done. And then closure, which is just the actual closeout of the project, so you don't have these projects that never seem to die or never seem to be completed. So this is the structure that we're working with. This first session is about planning, and within that, these are the key activities. Below those pieces are the key activities that we've identified in each phase. What we're going to focus on for planning is the first 4. So diving right, actually we're going to go to the project land map. So if you want to have a more fun way to look at this, here's the map again, and we're going to go through the planning forest very quickly. So jumping right into that, we're going to go into the project charter. The project charter is a document that's used to consider all aspects of the project, like the description, scope, deliverables, goals, objectives, success criteria, schedule and milestones, and of course, as Kathy said, who's actually going to work on it and what they're going to be doing. The project charter is typically prepared by the project manager or the project lead, but you may be asked for input as it's created. I really hope you are, because you guys are the ones that really know what work needs to be on that project charter. This is a key document, and if you pick only one thing to apply to your projects, this is probably one of the most effective things you can do. We're going to go into a very thorough example using the MFA project that Terry mentioned. It doesn't need to be as thorough as you're going to see, It can be one sheet that just says the high level points, but really the point is to have some structure and to think about the project before you start working on it. So let's dive into what's in a project charter. Now, if you want to see the actual project charter, this is the real project charter from our multi-factor authentication project. You can click that PDF link and follow along. If not, you can just watch the slides. We're going to cover every little bit of it. It starts off with the project name, the expected start date, and the expected end date. Now, I know these dates change, but the point is to do our best guess at the beginning and start with some sort of plan that we can work with. Moving right along, we'll go into the project organization. This is who's involved and what their general role is. You don't have to get so specific that every single person's listed here, but depending on the project size, you might just mention the teams, or you might get so granular as to mention every single person. We'll loop back to this and kind of go through it a little bit more in detail so that we can talk about the roles in the project. Next off, we go into project details. And this is just a brief description of the project in simple, easy to understand terms. What are you trying to accomplish and why? I won't read all this, but if you want to get into detail, the MFA PDF is a really good example to work from. It is very thorough. You don't have to be this thorough, but it is very thorough because, you know, it was a big project and we really wanted to make sure. That's a good question, Gabe. You know, if you're doing a one-day project, maybe a project charter doesn't make sense to take 2 hours to write a project charter for a one-day project. It really is one of those things that, and I want to use this point to kind of derail for a second. All of the tools we're giving you, you don't have to apply every single tool to every single project. You pick the ones that make sense for your project. If it's a 1 week project, probably not worth setting up status meetings, weekly status meetings, because it's a 1 week project, that kind of thing. You really find the tools that make sense to use, you apply them there. So in this case, I would say most projects you would use a project charter, but you can do very quickly. You know, we're going to update our firewall, or I don't know, very simple projects can have a very simple project charter, but the point is just to really stop and take an hour and think about the project through all these pieces of all these areas, and make sure you're not missing any points. Moving on, we'll get into scope in the project charter. This one's probably one of the most important pieces, which is how many folks will this impact, what's included and maybe not included that can help manage expectations. So in this example, we put what's in scope and what's out of scope. Sometimes it's helpful to use out of scope so that you can explicitly, you know, if you expect people to add on these features or think that people might think that these features are expected and you know that they're not, sometimes it's valuable to put what's out of scope so that we manage expectations right off the bat. You know, if the project doesn't affect anybody except you, you know, and nobody's ever going to look at it, you maybe don't have to get crazy about out of scope. But for these bigger projects where you start including more and more stakeholders, sometimes defining out of scope can be useful. Moving on to deliverables. This is what things are you delivering with the project? What products or results do you expect upon completion? This is physical items. This is, we have training videos, we have instructional videos, job aids, a dedicated phone number for emergencies, planning documents, things you might have to use in your system. These are all examples of deliverables. They are just what are the artifacts that are coming out of your project. We also add our goals alignment, which is helpful to make sure your project, you know, show how your project supports the strategic plan of your organization. That's just a good thing to do. Objectives and success criteria. How will you know if the project was a success? What are you trying to accomplish, and how do you know you're successful? And in MFA, it was a big project, but it boils down to these 3 items. So it really can just, what is the essential of what this project gets done? How do we know we did it well? If you've worked in development work, sometimes this might be called the definition of done. You know, how do you know you can tell the product owner, we've done the feature, we've succeeded, we're not fiddling with it anymore, we're moving on to the next piece of work. Risks. This is a big one, I think, from the project team side of things. I don't think anybody knows the risks better than the people that are the closest to the work. So this is a big place where your voice is super important. And we try to plan risks from the beginning with the project charter, but they're going to emerge throughout. You can't know every risk. Things pop up out of nowhere. So this is kind of an iterative thing whereas you see risks, bring it up during status meetings, one-on-one with your project manager, whatever it takes. But if you see a risk, you know, use your voice, speak up, because that is a very valuable place. It's a place where you have a lot of value. Moises, great question. The project charter does get shared with the team. This is like your sole source of authority on the project. I think that your entire team should be familiar with the project charter, especially from the point of scope, objectives, and your definition of done, or your success criteria. I think it's very good that you share that with the team. Moving on, in this project charter, we actually put our project schedule and milestones in. If you have a big schedule, you might not put it in the charter. You don't have to put it in the charter. Again, take the pieces that make sense. If your schedule is extremely fluid, it doesn't probably make sense to put it in the charter, but maybe at least listing the milestones would be valuable. And your milestones are like your key significant markers that indicate you've crossed a significant point in the project. You know, like your planning is done, now we can start to roll out. Our rollout's done, now we can start to do post support, that kind of thing. Those are milestones. And they really are whatever milestones make sense to you. You don't have to follow our definition of any milestones. It's going to be different for every project. Here's another example of the way milestones could be listed. And in this case, they got really thorough, so they listed some key activities that contribute to those milestones. You don't have to get the specific in your project charter, but it is an example of it. Another piece, quick, just what tools are we using? In our case, we have check boxes for Monday.com and where on Monday it's going to be located. If we're on Teams, where it is on Teams. Just information for the project team. Where are the resources that you need? And last up, we have other items to consider, pretty primarily on the project manager side, but I still want you guys to know about it. Budget, communications plan, how are you tracking and providing status updates? What's your training plan and your documentation plan? What's your closeout plan? So with our approach, the project charter is almost a project plan if you really go through it. And the point is that if you don't do anything else, at least you do the charter, and the charter was thorough. And I just want to end off, the project charter is the document that authorizes the project to begin. So in our case, Terry was the executive sponsor. He authorized, yes, this plan looks good, go for it. That way he can't come back 3 months later and say, hey, wait, what are you doing? And then kind of yank the rug out from underneath us. That's part of the value is kind of getting them to commit. And I see Terry smiling at that. Going back to the key roles in the project, like we talked at the beginning of the charter, I'm going to talk through a quick example of what these roles could look like. They don't have to follow this. Your project sponsor doesn't have to be a CTO. Your project manager doesn't have to be an IT director, but these are just kind of some examples of typical places where these people would fall. So your project sponsor, he's the top decision maker. He's funding the project. He has the ultimate authority and responsibility for our project. In our larger projects, we might have an executive sponsor and a regular sponsor where maybe we have a senior director that is overall that is dealing with most of the decisions. But then when we come to a real important decision that might have a big impact on budget, that kind of thing, that's where we might float up to an executive sponsor, which might be at the CTO level. Really depends on the size of your project and how your organization works out. Going to the steering committee, we had our ITS senior leadership serving as a steering committee. These are the key people that assist the PM with making decisions. They're kept informed. They're kind of working with the sponsor to make the project happen and provide direction. Moving on to the project manager, this is the person that's overseeing the project work plan. They're the ones reporting on the status and leading the project team that's responsible for actually achieving the project objectives. Some projects might have a project lead. In this scenario, it could be a functional manager, supervisor, senior staff member, just somebody to help take on that work along with the PM. Especially if you get into big projects that have lots of teams involved, you might start to get some more project leads involved. And here's an example of that. Your project team members, that's you guys performing the work of the project, actually doing the work. Now with a large project like MFA, you might have a core team that's pretty much involved the entire time, and then you might have extended teams that are pulled in as they're needed. For MFA, our cybersecurity team, that was our core team. And then with our extended teams, they had to work with infrastructure and cloud, they had to work with dev, they had to work with testing, work with communications, graphics, documentation, training, support. All of these teams aren't involved the entire time. but they are just brought in as we get into the phases that involve them. And then the stakeholders in our example were all permanent employees because they were all affected by MFA. Stakeholders, the definition of stakeholders is anybody that's affected by the project, and that includes you on the team. Stakeholders is a really big term. So project team members, anybody that's impacted, your vendors, maybe your parents, your families, your students, anybody that's affected, period. Moving on quickly, we're going to get into the file repository. Really exciting stuff. Look at that, we're actually on time. File repository, nothing crazy to wrap your head around. The point is to have a central place where your project files are kept, ideally in a consistent format so that all your projects are following the same format. Seems kind of maybe a little heavy-handed on the planning side to create file repositories for every project, but I promise you, in 5 years, when somebody asks you for some obscure configuration file that you used 5 years ago, having a file repository will make your life so much easier. I actually just got asked for a configuration file for a control processor last week from a project from 3 years ago when we weren't doing file repositories, and I had to juggle between about 6 different computers to try to find that one little obscure config file, and it was very frustrating. So file repository, doing that work up front, it's going to make your life easier long term, especially as you do more and more projects. Now, how to serve as a team member. You just want to make sure you have access to the files. Don't wait until you're actually needing to access to find out you don't have access. Just find out ahead of time. I love the way you put that. It's key to empowering collaboration. Definitely is. Again, as a project team member, you can review the folder structure, just kind of understand where things are going to go, and just don't dump them in because you're in a rush and then the thing looks like a crazy mess afterwards. The more you do up front, the easier life's going to become long term. And then just know how and where, like I said. Floating through very quickly, I'm just going to touch on the project plan. This is really the PM's responsibility, but I want you to know it, and it helps avoid emails. Yes, definitely. Nobody wants 25 emails about one little file. It's not a good way to spend our time. The project plan, I just want you guys to see what it looks like and to know that it exists. You'll probably be asked to contribute to it, and we'll cover it more in execution, but I just want you to know from the planning point of view that a project plan could look like this. Here's a very simple Excel example where we list out what the phase is, what the item is, and by item we mean like task or what activity needs to be done, who's responsible for it, the expected due date, and then the status, which is typically not done, not started, working on it, you're stuck or you're done. And if you're stuck, let somebody know you're stuck and how we can get it unstuck. Now, if you're lucky, you're going to use project management software. This is a screenshot from Monday.com. It follows the same principles, but it tends to have more granularity. It tends to allow more collaboration. And the biggest thing for me, it's major for me, is that your communication and the activity that your communication is about, they're side by side. So you don't have to find out when, read through the context of 35 emails, this long email chain, trying to figure out what activity am I supposed to be doing? It's right there, they're side by side. It seems really simple, but when you're working on a lot of projects and you're trying to keep, 30 balls up in the air, that little thing makes life a lot easier. All right, home stretch, we're going to the kickoff meeting. Quick show of hands, how many of you guys have participated in a kickoff meeting? Just physical hand raises. Few feet, about half you, awesome. So for some of you, this will be recap, and some of you, this will be new. Let me get back to my presentation. The kickoff meeting it occurs at the beginning of the project. Once the project's authorized and we have a reasonable plan in place, this is where the kickoff meeting happens. It's intended for anyone that's going to be involved in the project. So you might not include the actual clients, the customers. If your project is for students and parents, you might not include them in the kickoff, or you might. Depends on the exact nature. But the real point is the team, the sponsors, the real people that are close to the project, to kind of just kick it off, get it started. As a team member, what is expected of you is first to listen for the why. So what problem are we trying to solve? What new thing are we creating? Why are we doing it? Sorry, and for whom, what's the justification? What's the objectives and success criteria? The next thing you're listening for is the who, which is what teams are involved, which people are involved, what are their roles, what's your role? The when, what's the schedule? Are there multiple phases? And the real important one is when is the go live? If you're flipping a switch for go live, that's a big date to know about. Next thing you want to listen for is the how. So how are we all going to work together? What are the expectations? How will everyone communicate and collaborate? And last off, the tools. So where are files stored? Where's our project plan? How's it going to be set up? Things like that. And I have a quick activity for you guys. Question is, when you leave the kickoff meeting, how do you hope to feel? How would you hope, just based on what you read, starting a big project, what's the energy we're looking for? Inspired. I like that. Prepared, Tyler, definitely. Confident. Empowered, excited. Super excited. Included, I like that one. One of my Strength Finder strengths is inclusion, so I like that. Confident, knowing what you're supposed to do. Informed and focused. You guys really nailed it all. It's about motivation and it's about clarity. I think those are the main things. So that's our kickoff meeting. I'm going to go very fast in review because we're over our time and I don't want to drag you guys out. I'm going to be very fast on this. We just went through the planning forest, starting with the project charter. We hit the file repository, we hit the project plan, and we hit the kickoff meeting. That was it. If you're coming to me, coming with the next session, we're going to jump into the execution mountains, and I hope you don't mind if I get too corny throughout this. That's it. I just want to say thank you, guys. Take a 13-minute break if you're going to the next one, and I'll see you at 11 o'clock.